Community Action News with Rick Godley, CAN. Remember, when you can't, maybe together we can. Community Action News, CAN.
Rick Talk.
Thank y'all for allowing me to come and tell my story. Before I start, I would like to recognize three gentlemen here that were highly influential with me in my journey in starting the first drive-thru daiquiri shop. That would be Mr. Harold Parker, that you guys know, Dolph Williams here, and Ralph Pettigee. So my story starts 40 years ago. I put a portable building in the middle of a lot in Lafayette and started a concept that no one thought would be legal. No one thought it was possible. The first drive-thru daiquiri shop in the world. The story starts here in Ruston. I was a Louisiana Tech student, and back then Ruston was a dry city. I'm sure y'all remember. So in order to buy alcohol, we had to drive out to this quaint little place on the outskirts of town named Wilmart. Now Wilmart was, everybody in Ruston knew where Wilmart was. And at one point, Dolph's mother had ordered some little cocktails for two things that weren't selling very well. And according to the story Dolph told me, she decided to make blender drinks out of them. So she did that, and she had like a little impulse thing by the cash register. And her concept went over so well, she ran out of inventory. So they eventually brought in a frozen drink machine. And I was a student in Louisiana Tech at the time, and I went out and I saw this thing, and it was a eureka moment for me. I immediately thought about making a business out of nothing but frozen drinks. So Dolph was there, and I asked Dolph about the equipment, and he went through it and explained how the machine worked and everything. And his dad was there, and he liked the idea of me having my own business. So he liked it so much, he liked the idea so much that he offered to at least purchase the equipment for me if I could get the business going. So that was really exciting. That took away a lot of the initial cost for the shop. So the more I studied their business, the more I realized that it was a product-driven business. People drove out to get the drinks, and they didn't really hang around very long. So it just made sense to me to do a drive-through. That way, it would minimize the operational cost. I wouldn't have so many employees, and I wouldn't have to have a parking lot or anything. So the elephant in the room for me was, would it be legal to sell alcohol through a drive-through window? So I asked everybody I knew, and everybody thought that was the craziest idea you could ever have. No way are they going to let you do that legally. So I thought about it. I said, well, I'm going to find the real answer. So I need to see what the law says. So I got in my car and I drove to Lafayette. And I'm standing in the city hall there, looking at the receptionist. And she looks up at me, and I said, I want a copy of all the laws that pertain to selling alcohol in Lafayette. And she looked at me. I could tell no one had ever asked her anything like that before. It was usually a packaged liquor store or it was a bar, but my deal was somewhere in the middle of that, so I wanted to read the laws to see what I could and couldn't do. So she said, son, what are you trying to do? And I was hoping she wouldn't say that. But I went ahead and I gave her my concept, and she started snickering, and she finally just couldn't help herself. She just broke out laughing. And everybody in the office came running up to see what the commotion was about. And they all got a big laugh, and I was the entertainment in City Hall in Lafayette that day. But I stayed long enough to get everything I wanted. So the next day, I went to the tobacco people in Baton Rouge to get copies of the state laws. And it was a little bit different there. They were a little more professional. There were all attorneys in there, and they had all these pointed questions for me. And I wasn't really getting anywhere. So I finally tried to think of a question I could ask where they would just make copies and let me be on my way. So I told them that I had a new idea for a concept, but I was going to mold it around what the law allowed. And if they would just give me the copies, I felt like I could make that determination on my own and I wouldn't be wasting all their time. So they liked the idea of me not wasting their time. So before I knew it, I had reams of all the laws that pertain to everything from distillation to importing wine, everything you could think of. They just try to get rid of me. So I took all that information and I drove back to Ruston and I studied those laws for 2 months. Nowhere could I find that it said it was illegal to do what I was trying to do. And I finally got to a point where I realized the only way I'd ever know would just be to do it. And my business plan was I'll open up, and if I get away with it for 1 week and I'm not arrested, it's legal. So that's what I decided to do. But I needed a financial partner. So I went to the fraternity house I belong to here in Ruston, and I found the richest guy in the fraternity and convinced him to be my partner. So he was on board. So the only thing I needed now was living expenses. So I went back to Tallulah, my hometown, and I put on the most grandest garage sale you've ever seen. And so much so that if I could have done 3 more of them, I would have needed a business partner. So anyway, I've got everything going, and I'm ready to head off to Lafayette to start my dream. And I stopped by my parents' house on the way out to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, and also call my business partner to give him an update on where I was. So I got him on the phone, and the worst thing that could happen happened. He backed out on me. Too much liability, he said. The more I talked to him, the more I realized that his parents had told him, "You ain't doing this, son." So I was back to square one. So there I was at home. I unpacked my car, and my parents finally showed up, and they were wondering why I hadn't left to go to Ruston. So I gave them the bad news. And my mother looked at me with this laser stare like I'd never seen it. She said, "Son, if it's money that's holding you back, we'll get it for you." And my dad said, "I'll go to the bank in the morning and I'll co-sign a loan to get you started." So I was back in the game again. So after I left the bank that morning, I was headed to Lafayette. So I get down there and I finally get the building set up, sitting on the lot. So everybody in Lafayette is riding by this vacant lot with a storage building on it. This building right here. And they were stopping. "What's going on with this thing?" And I would tell them the story, and they all laughed, thought I was kidding. They thought it was going to be a packaged liquor store or something. But when I put all the signs up, Daiquiri Factory, and it had the drive-through and everything, no one could believe that was true. So they all stopped and had to interview me and asked me, was I really going to have alcohol and so forth? I said, "Yeah, sure." So they laughed at me because they thought I was crazy. And I laughed at them because they were all the same. So we all got a big laugh. So it finally came, it finally came the opening day. So I went down there real early and I mixed up all the mixes and all, like Dolphin them had taught me how to do, and turned on the machines, and I was just busy as I could be. And it finally occurred to me, I had been in that store for 5 hours and I hadn't had the first customer. So I started to panic. this is the worst thing I could have ever done here. It's a disaster. So I sat around all day in that store and not got one customer. So when it finally got dark, I went over and I turned on the exterior signs, and a miracle happened. Cars came in from everywhere, filled up the whole lot. So I had to go outside and tell everybody to get in their car. There was a drive-through. No one understood. You know, you had to drive around. I said, just pretend you're at McDonald's, but you drive around and you get your drink. Because really, the lot was just a dirt lot. It was hard to tell what I was trying to do, really. So they all came through, and it was instant success. It was beyond my wildest dreams. I never thought I'd ever get into something like this. It was just as fast as I could hand them out the window, they were going. And finally, the sheriff's department took interest in it. So sure enough, here comes 3 units pull up in my driveway, blocking the driveway, essentially shutting the business down. And they come storming in the building. We want to see everybody's bar cards, which is a certificate employees have to have in order to sell alcohol. And I was aware of the law, but I was just too busy. I just kind of neglected to have them all go down and do that. So one of the officers in charge goes over and he grabs the phone and calls the sheriff. They have a little quick conversation, and then he hangs the phone up and he looks at me. He says, "Sheriff says we got to close right now." And I knew I didn't have to close. I'd read the laws, but I didn't want to be confrontational, so I agreed. I said, "Okay, well, if the sheriff says we close, we'll close." So we shut down. And I sent all my employees to go get their bar cards and so forth. And the next day I opened up and just ran the store alone. And finally they all drifted back in and everybody had their bar cards and everything was back to normal, I thought. About a week later, these same guys show back up, the same guys from the sheriff's department. Busted in my store. They want to see my liquor license. They want to see my occupational license. They want to see my health department. They're looking for something that I might have missed. And after they went through all of that, and there was nothing that they could come up with. One of the guys pulls out a law, and he starts reading the law to me. And at the very end of the law, it says, there can be no minors on the premises there or abouts. And he folded that law up, he put it in his briefcase, and he says, "I hereby close this operation by order of the Lafayette Sheriff's Department." And I looked at him, I said, "Hold on a minute. You can't close this store." I said, "That law is ambiguous." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Where is the bar?" I said, "Nobody comes in here. It's a drive-through thing. You know, we just hand the drink out through the window. So they're not coming in here. If they have a minor in the car with them, you know, that's fine. They're not in the bar. Where is the bar at?" I said, "The way that law reads, if you went to a grocery store and you bought a 6-pack of beer and you had a minor in the car," I said, the way that law is written, that would be illegal." So the guy in charge looked at me, kind of confused, and he says, "Wait a minute." So he goes over, he picks up my phone, he calls the sheriff again. This time he looks at me and says, "The sheriff wants to talk to you." So I said, "Well, all right." So I walk over, I get the phone from him. I could barely introduce myself with this sheriff screaming on the phone. He says, "Boy, I want you in my office at 8 o'clock in the morning. Don't be late. If you're late, I'm sending my people out after you." I said, "That won't be necessary. I will be there in the morning." So the next morning, I'm at his office at 7:30. I finally get my opportunity to walk in there, and I take one step in his office. I'm looking across the room at a red-faced sheriff. And he looks at me and he says, "I have heard nothing but complaints about you since the day you got here. I want you to close that store today. I don't want to hear nothing else about it." And I said, "With all due respect, I have a financial obligation to my family, and I can't close this store. But if you can show me a law that says what I'm doing is illegal, I will close it. And he took that as me being defiant, and he cranked up the heat on me then. He really started saying some things I can't repeat, but he finally walked over to me, and he was punching me in the chest for more emphasis. So that's when I decided to leave. So I get over to my daiquiri shop, and I'm thinking about, there's going to be a setup here. There's got to be a setup. This guy wants me out. So the only thing I could think of he could do to me would be to close me down in the event that I sold to a minor. So I told all of my employees, we're checking IDs like nobody's business. I don't care if they had gray hair and on a walker, we got to have an ID. So, and I even went to the extreme. I hired an employee to sit on a stool with a flashlight, checking IDs before they even got to the menu board. And I bought a walkie-talkie in case something happened. He could radio us inside, so we wouldn't sell anybody. And my assumption was right. The first night we had about 40 people drove through. They were underage. It looked like they were in their early 30s, and that went on for months. And finally, it subsided, and it was to a trickle. But I kept all of those stop guards in place anyway. And I kept them like that the whole time I was in Lafayette. So then I think everything is okay. Business is just incredible, unbelievable. We're serving 4,000 to 6,000 people every day. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen. If I hadn't been there, I wouldn't believe it. So finally, the Lafayette Police Department gets interested in me. So they had been driving up and down in front of the store trying to intimidate my customers already. So they finally took the bold step of setting a police unit right outside my drive-thru, giving every customer a sobriety check. So I've got Harold there with me. He was my general manager. So Harold and I sitting there trying to figure out what can we do about this? And Harold's a former a parole officer, so he kind of had a little bit of legal background, I guess you could say. And Harold tells me, he says, well, what they're doing is not illegal because they have probable cause. I said, well, what are you talking about, Harold? He says, well, the driver has got a alcohol in his hand, so as long as that happens, they can do what they're doing. So the more we thought about it, he and I brainstormed, and we decided, well, we got to get rid of probable cause somehow. So what we decided to do, we took out one of the alcoholic products and we put in frozen lemonade for 25 cents. So Harold goes out there and he changes the marquee sign to say, frozen lemonade, 25 cents. And right after he put that on that sign, that officer looked at that and he got in his car and drove off. So we dodged a bullet there. And business was just constantly getting bigger and bigger every day. And finally, my store got to be a national story. So some of the writers were from UPI and AP Wireline. So we were a national story, a big embarrassment to a lot of the politicians in Lafayette. So since there wasn't a law that says I couldn't do what I was doing, they decided to make a law. So they did. They passed the open container law that said you couldn't drive in the streets of Lafayette with an open alcoholic beverage. So I was trying to figure out how to comply with that because that would shut us down. So Harold and I talked back and forth trying to come up with an idea, and everything we thought of was kind of good, but it wasn't a slam dunk or anything. So I got really up and nervous about it. So I called one of my old college roommates to get his opinion, and he says, man, I don't know. You need to talk to my dad on this. I said, well, put him on the line. I need to talk to somebody. because I'm fixing to go out of business. So anyway, his dad got on the phone, and he was a very influential farmer in the Alexandria area, well-connected man, and he was a good source for me. And he said, I'm going to be in Lafayette tomorrow on a business meeting. Let me think over the night. I'll have something for you tomorrow, he assured me. And we'll meet tomorrow after my meeting, and we'll go over this. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. I said, okay. So the next day, he and I met at a bar in Lafayette, and I went through everything that happened to me, everything Harold and I tried to do that worked, everything that we thought might work. And he interrupted me in mid-sentence. He said, you sent certified letters to them asking them what a sealed container was, and nobody replied to you because they don't know either. I said, what are you talking about? They pass a law. They don't even know how to. He said, that's how city government works sometimes. They pass an ordinance, but they don't know what a sealed container is. And he said, what you need to do is just put some tape over the straw slot and call it a day. He said, that's a sealed container. I said, do you think that'll work? He said, absolutely that'll work. He said, if it don't work, they got to tell you why it doesn't work. So I said, well, that's unbelievable. So I left the meeting. I went to a off supply place, and I bought me a case of tape right then. I had it hammered. So I get back to the office. I tell Harold about it, and we laugh until we're almost unconscious at the absurdity of somebody passing a law and not knowing what it was. So I had that thing worked out, but the problem I had now was everybody in Lafayette thought we were going to close when the open container law went into effect. And we hadn't told anybody what our solution was going to be because we wanted to keep it a secret. I was afraid that if it leaked out, the city would change the ordinance somehow, and so we'd be back to square one. So anyway, business was slowing down because everybody was afraid to be around the store. And I was afraid that when the ordinance went into effect, if all the news media I knew would be there, and if they broadcast a situation where we had almost zero business, that would be the death knell. So I had to do something to ensure we had a big turnout that day in particular. So I decided to do a promotion. And Harold and I, we got on the tailgate, started trying to hammer out an idea, and finally we came up with the idea of having, I said, well, we never had a grand opening. Let's just have a grand opening. Yeah, that's a good idea. So we'll have a grand opening the same day the ordinance goes into effect. So I said, well, yeah, we need to advertise. And of course, the best way to advertise would be on radio because people are in cars and that's our customer. So I remembered one of my liquor salesmen had previously worked in radio. So I called him to help me write the 60-second spots. So he comes over to my office, lets himself in. He goes into my little wet bar I had there and makes me the strongest drink I think I've ever had. Comes in my office and he hands me that drink and he says, drink this. And he was a comical guy, so I figured there's going to be some kind of joke at the end of this thing. So I drank the drink like he said. And when it emptied, he went back and refilled it. Same thing again, drink this. And when I tried to talk, he said, just shut up and drink that. So I was laughing at him. So I finally got a little bit tipsy. And when he felt like he had me where he wanted me, then he looked at me and he pulled out a pen and a pad. And he said, tell me what the grand opening is all about without thinking. So I rolled my office chair back and I yelled down the hall at Harold's office. I said, Harold, how many people going through the store these days on a Good Friday? And Harold said, oh, about 4,000. So I rolled my desk back up and I went into this monologue. The most ridiculous things that I could think of is, to try to get a laugh out of the guy. And I went on and on. And finally, I looked up and I noticed he wasn't laughing. He was sitting there writing every word I said down. And finally, he looked up at me and he said, "Perfect. We ain't changing a word. You nailed it." I said, "What are you talking about?" I was joking. I was kidding with you. And he goes, "No, this is gold here. If you do this, you're going to have them lined up from here to Abbeville." I said, "Oh man, I can't do that." He finally went back and forth and he talked me into it. So the next morning, I went into a radio station. I went into a sound booth and I recorded the commercial, and I got them to do copies for me. And I bought all of the radio time that was available on every radio station in that market and bombarded them with this commercial. If I can get this thing to work. It was working earlier. Y'all.
Battery 100%. Connected to David's 1-2.
Daiquiri factory, it's so good. You ought to try, then you really should.
Is there anyone in Lafayette who has 4,000 friends? Hi, I'm David Ervin, president of the Daiquiri Factory. And I sure hope I do, because on June the 25th and 26th, I'm giving a free bottle of champagne to the first 4,000 customers that come to my Johnson Street location. It's our grand opening. And to be honest with you, I don't know what to do at grand openings other than give away a lot of free stuff. I've got Daiquiri Factory t-shirts and visors, 25-cent frozen lemonade, and a couple of surprises. So come on out and join us. Please don't bring any minors. All drinks will be served in our new sealed containers.
The Daiquiri factory, it's so good. You ought to try, then you really should.
So that hit every radio in Lafayette Parish, so everybody was excited about it. Finally, the day finally arrived, and I had ordered some frozen drink equipment from Dolph Williams, and he made a point to make the delivery that day so he could witness all of this insanity that was about to unfold. So Dolph met me at my office, and together we drove to the store. I had asked Harold not to sell anything until I got there. I told him that I wanted to witness anything that happened that day. And Harold and I had met with all the employees the day before, and we explained to them, we really couldn't tell y'all, we really couldn't guarantee that we wouldn't all be arrested, and that they weren't required to work if they didn't want to, but if they didn't work, we were going to pay them anyway. So, but we'd appreciate if anybody would be willing to help us. We'd need their help, and if worse came to worse, I promised them I'd bail them all out of jail. So I stuffed $10,000 in my back pocket that morning and headed out to work with Dolph in the car with me. We turned on to Johnston Street, headed toward the store. We were about a mile and a half from the store, and I noticed this line of cars in the turn lane. And I was looking at Dolph. I said, "Dolph, somebody else is doing a promotion the same day. I can't believe that." And we were just shaking our head. And it finally occurred to both of us that these cars were lined up going to the Daiquiri Factory. And there was another line equally as long going the other direction. So I walked in. We finally got to the store, and I went in. The first thing I did, I went in and I grabbed one of these styrofoam cups with the tape over the top, and I walked outside and presented it to the media. There were camera crews from Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, all over Louisiana. It was a circus. And I stuck that cup out, and all of them zoomed in on this styrofoam cup. That was the big secret that we were holding from the whole time. As the festivities went on, I started noticing state troopers massing across the street from us. So I looked at Harold and said, Harold, this ain't good. So pretty soon it looked like the whole troop and the whole force was over there. And finally, they all just walked across the street shoulder to shoulder and started writing traffic citations to everybody that was in line to disperse the crowd. And it was total mayhem. Harold and I were running around trying to calm people down, and fortunately, nobody was killed that day, or nobody went to jail. And so the following day, I was on the phone. Am I going too long?
Yeah, just 8 minutes to 1, and we want to talk to questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. So anyway, we ended up suing the city and the state, and we won that case. And the judge ruled that the sealed container I had was in fact legal, and it's still a law to this day. Thank y'all. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Please drive carefully and arrive home safely. Good night.